I didn't start paying attention to the election until after the king died. "I have called you all here with a very grave announcement," the town crier said as we gathered to hear the news. "This morning, the king was murdered by an unknown assailant." Murmuring surrounded me. "The capital urges the rest of the kingdom to maintain business as usual. There may be some delays in the arrival of our administrator for the upcoming mayoral election, but the capital assures us that one should arrive in the near future." I walked back to the forge with my co-workers as the crowd dispersed. "I'll take care of things for the rest of the night," I told them as we arrived. Tools and weapons hung all over the walls, rustling slightly as I turned off the fires. I regretted turning off the last one so soon as night consumed the room. Equipment lay strewn across the tables when I arrived, but their tops shined as I left. Ready for anything. We would have to be. I passed by a small crowd the next morning. The mayor, Meyer London of the Unionists, and his challenger, Henry Goldvogel of the Monarchists, were addressing them. I had already slept in today, but I couldn't help but sit and listen. Meyer spoke in a gruff voice. "Many challenges have come before us in the past, and every time we have stood together as a union to face it," he said. "Now is no different." He clenched his calloused hands into fists as he spoke. Henry spoke in a smoother voice. "The union takes too long to make decisions," he said. "We don't have time to draw up some committee to hear everyone's opinion. In a crisis, we need a strong leader who can make the right choices quickly to keep us safe." His pristine hands never moved off his podium. I had to admit, in all my years of living in Cartaria, he was the most reasonable candidate the monarchists had ever put up. I walked into the forge and glanced at the tall stack of papers on the end table. Everyone else was already setting up, so I stood on a chair to get their attention. "A lot of orders came in overnight from all over the kingdom," I said. "This rush should put us well above our monthly quota, but I don't want to see any drops in quality just because we have more to make." I stepped off the chair and grabbed my hammer. "Let's do this right." Later in the day, I sifted through a pile of some of the spearheads our new worker, Nathan, had made. Some had dents and others were tilted. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked him. He jumped a little and his face turned bright red underneath the soot. I'm so sorry," he said. "There's just so much to do it." He started hyperventilating. "It's just an endless stream of work, and everyone else seems to be moving so smoothly that I just feel like I'm letting everyone else down. If I don't finish today, that Hey!" I put my hand on his shoulder. "I know it's a lot. Just settle down a bit." His breathing slowed. "You're new here, so we don't expect you to keep up with the others. But that's not a bad thing. Everyone here has been where you are before, but this?" I showed him a mangled spearhead. "We can't have this." He looked down at the ground and clenched his fist. "I'm sorry. Don't worry about it, Nathan." He looked back up at me and I brushed the soot off from around his eyes. "Why don't you go take a short break, eh? I'll fix these, and when you get back, I want you to refocus. You got that?" He nodded. "Thank you, Glenn." A few days later, we heard another announcement from the town crier. Our election administrator from the capital had arrived. A man I'd never seen before stood next to the crier and introduced himself as Lyndon. "Who are you?" someone in the crowd asked. "Where's Casey?" asked another. "Casey is still occupied by the situation at the capital," Lyndon replied. He spoke slowly, as though he were choosing his words with care. "He said his skills were better served investigating the king's murder than running your silly little elections," he scoffed. "So he sent me instead." "That doesn't tell us anything about who you are." He pulled a certificate out of his bag and showed it to the crowd. "I am a recent graduate of the Royal Academy, looking to serve my kingdom in any way possible. That's all you need to know." I looked closely at the paper, looking for the names of the Academy's head instructors. James's signature was there, although it was sloppier than usual, but there was nothing where Scott was supposed to have signed. "Hey, what happened to—" An explosion cut me off. There was smoke coming from the forge, and not from the chimney. "Let's go!" I yelled, and all of my co-workers followed me out of the crowd. As we ran, everyone pulled out their weapons, but I looked behind me and saw Nathan with nothing in his hands. I slowed down to meet him. "What's going on?" he asked. "Bandit raid," I replied. "But they don't usually come all the way into town. Just grab something and be ready to fight." We burst through the front door and entered into a smoky haze. Bandits stood with large bags filled with the weapons we had made. "There's only 3. I held up my hand and looked at Spencer, who was knocking an arrow and squinting through the smoke. "Shoot to stun," I said. He nodded, keeping his eyes on his target. As we entered our battle formation, the bandits froze. One dropped his bag and tried to escape through the open back door, but Spencer fired an arrow that hit the top of his helmet, knocking him out. He aimed at the other two. One dropped his bag to pick up his friend, and they all ran. "I'll handle this," I told the others as I ran after the bandits. With so much weighing them down, I easily caught up to them and drew my sword. The one with the bag looked at me and stopped before he reached the forest. "Keep going!" he yelled to his friend. He brought his bag of weapons down to his side and drew a sword out of it. I lunged at him, but found my arm knocked to the side by a bag swung at high speeds. Stumbling, I glared at him and regained my footing. I parried a sword slash and he swung the bag at me again. Slipping under it, I kicked his ribs in the same direction as the overswung bag, breaking his balance. I nicked the back of his sword hand with my own as I slid behind him, disarming him before knocking him face first into the leafy ground. "It's not worth it!" he yelled as he let go of the bag and scrambled away. I caught my breath before grabbing it and walking back to the forge. The others waited for me outside the back exit. They had seen the whole fight. Spencer lowered his bow as I approached them. Everyone was standing except for Nathan. I knelt to look him in the eye. "Hey, it's all right," I said. I offered my hand to help him up. He pulled himself in and hugged me tightly. "Don't worry," I told him. "We're all looking out for each other, keeping each other safe." We returned to a crowd more restless than ever. Henry was giving a speech. My co-workers rolled their eyes, but I listened. "And this is what happens when we don't have a strong leader," he said more forcefully than anything before. "These raids are becoming more frequent and more dangerous by the day. We can't afford to waste time deliberating with the Union." He slammed his fist on the podium. "We need action! When you vote tomorrow, be sure to vote for me, and I will keep Cartaria safe." The next morning, I went to the polls and cast my ballot for Henry Goldvogel. Everyone got the morning off to vote, but even in the afternoon while the ballots were being counted, we were too preoccupied to work. They would announce the winner that evening at the main conference chamber with the entire town in attendance. I walked in and tried to figure out where to sit. Henry and a lot of his supporters were on the right side of the room, while Mayor London and his supporters were on the left side. There were a lot more open seats on the right side. My co-workers to my left shot me a scornful look as I walked to the other side. I sat down next to someone I didn't really know and kept to myself. Nobody told me to sit there, but some invisible force compelled me to. The intensity of the crowd made me sweat. After the last few people trickled into the room, Lyndon walked up to the podium. He wore a patronizing smile on his face as he spoke. "People of Cartaria, thank you for your participation in this wonderful tradition of yours." The sarcasm in his voice fooled nobody. "I would like for the two candidates to stand up here with me as I announce the results." Their footsteps echoed throughout the room as they walked onto the stage. Henry glanced over at Lyndon as he stood next to him, while Meyer took a deep breath and faced the crowd. "As prescribed in the terms of unionization agreed to in the year 675 by King Eorcan, I hereby announce the following results of the 19th biannual Cartaria mayoral election. For Meyer London, 457 votes, and for Henry Goldvogel, 694 votes." "No way that's true," someone yelled. I looked to my left. Dozens of men and women stood up in protest. I couldn't even tell who had spoken. "There are more of us standing here on this side of the room than you said voted for Mayor London." "You heard the man. You lost," someone close to me yelled back. "Quit being such a sore loser," another yelled. All around me, people started standing up and walking towards the aisle. Voices filled the room until I couldn't hear myself think. "Conspirator! Blind follower! Traitor! Cheap!" Suddenly a sharp noise cut through the cacophony. "Enough!" Meyer banged his gavel on the podium until the room settled. "This is not how we conduct ourselves. We're not anarchists, we're union. And for the time being, I'm still the union president, which is why I call an emergency meeting to resolve this situation peacefully. All in favor of calling an emergency meeting of the Cartaria Workers' Union?" The crowd roared in approval. "Any opposed?" Henry and a few others spoke out. Meyer turned to Lyndon. "Get out," he said. "Excuse me? Only union members can attend our meetings. Get out." Lyndon drew his sword. "I don't think you understand who's supposed to be in charge here." Meyer drew a sword to match Lyndon's. Several members of the crowd from both sides stood up and drew their weapons too, pointing them at the intruder. "You picked the wrong town to try to pull that in," one of them said. Lyndon sheathed his sword and stormed out of the room. Meyer recomposed himself and turned back to the crowd. "I think the best way to resolve this peacefully is to redo the election through a public vote, tomorrow at sundown. That way we—" "What?" someone a few rows in front of me said. "You can't just—" The gavel sounded. "If you would have just let me finish, I would have let you talk." I rested my head on my arm and sighed. "As I was saying," Meyer continued, "that way there can be no question in anyone's mind as to who won the most votes. I put forward a motion to do just that, and I opened the floor to debate." I lost track of how long I sat there just thinking. People from both sides got on stage and spoke at length about questioning unearned authority and accepting the results as they are. Occasionally someone would jeer in response to one of their remarks. By the 10th speaker, I started covering my ears. My right leg bounced restlessly on my heel, my eyebrows tensed. My fingernails almost cut into my palms. I didn't even care what they were saying anymore because they were all saying the same thing. Finally, the stage emptied and the crowd quieted. "Is there anybody else who wishes to speak?" Meyer asked. I rose my hand, stood up, and walked towards the stage without a word. When I got to the podium, a sea of eyes stared me down. It was only then that I got a sense of who I was dealing with. On Meyer's side of the crowd, I saw dirty faces, miners, smiths, lumberjacks, farmers. Henry's supporters wore cleaner clothes and sat up straight, merchants, specialists. Banners hung along both walls, displaying the symbols of the Union: a broken crown, a pickaxe, a hammer, a sword. "Look," I said, "I know everyone's stressed and angry about what's going on. These aren't normal times. The kingdom is in chaos, raids are on the rise, and some rando thinks he can come in and take over our elections? We can't feed this fire. We must stand together as a union. That's why I rise in support of tomorrow's election." The crowd rumbled a little. Someone who had been sitting near me yelled, "Traitor!" I didn't fight in the revolution, but I understand why it happened. We were tired of outside forces controlling our destiny. We made some concessions with the king when we established our democracy, but the point was that we took matters into our own hands to stand up against injustice. Now though, the king is dead. I don't know where this Lyndon guy came from, but it seems to me that he's just someone trying to take advantage of the kingdom's instability for his own gain. Why should we bend to his will just to appease the wishes of a dead man? Calling a voice election isn't about overturning the results in front of us. It's about looking beyond Lyndon's mirage and figuring out who really won. We may not like announcing our vote out loud. We may not feel comfortable with telling everyone what we believe because we're afraid of how people will react when they disagree with us. But if we can't tolerate each other's opposing points of view, how can we even call ourselves a union? I voted for Henry Goldvogel, but that doesn't mean I hate everything to do with the Unionists. That also doesn't mean I agree with everything the monarchists have to say. At this point, I don't even care who wins the election anymore. All I care about is preserving what little sense of stability we can hold on to these days so that we can protect those around us. If we can't even do that, who are we? Nobody spoke as I walked off the stage and down the aisle. When I reached my row, the person sitting at the end refused to let me in. I turned away from a wall of crossed faces as Meyer returned to the podium. "If nobody else wishes to speak, then debate on the motion has closed and it is time to vote. The clerk will call the roll," he said. Name after name echoed through the chamber. When a voice to my left spoke, it almost always said yes, but not every voice to my right said no. I heard Nathan's name amidst the crowd. He voted yes. I heard Spencer's name, very close to mine. He voted yes. "Glenn Taylor," the clerk said. "Yes," I said from the center of the room. After all the names had been called, the clerk said, "On this motion, the yeas are 623, the nays are 528. The motion is agreed to." The crowd stayed silent as Meyer walked back to the podium. "With that taken care of, I declare this meeting adjourned," he said. "Meet back here tomorrow at sundown." The gavel sounded. I turned around and walked out of the room without saying a word. A mass of people from both sides coalesced behind me as I headed home, bombarding me with questions. I stepped into my house, looked at the crowd, slammed the doors shut, and went to bed.